You understand. SOHO and NOHO residents, many of whom are seniors aging in place and are concerned about how this plan will negatively impact this community. There's frustration that I just want to acknowledge that many comments that people made diligently over the last few years were not taken into account. And so I acknowledge that frustration. I understand also the conservationists are concerned that zoning of the historic district. And I do hope there's some commercial property owners here because we haven't had many attend community board 2 meeting. So tonight we're going to ask that you channel that energy and that passion into asking constructive questions. We have a whole team of experts here tonight. This meeting is in person, like the July 23rd meeting, but it's going to be run a lot more like the July 24th meeting over Zoom. So we'll be looking at asking tough questions and really going into the details on this plan. I want to quickly introduce this team, and then I want to go through the ground rules. So we have from the Department of City Planning, we have Liz Duchen, who's the Manhattan Director, John Nennigan, who's the Senior Counsel, Sylvia Lee, the Senior Planner, Andy Cantu, the Urban Planner, and we have 2 people from HPD. We have Eddie Almonte, and we might have, and we have, I can say your name right. Paris, thank you, Paris. So we have a large group here tonight. I want to talk about the meeting protocol. What's different about this meeting and what we're going to, so one, we have better acoustics. If you can't hear, we encourage you to come to the front. We do not want any verbal interruptions. We're trying something new. Everyone should have a red and green card. If you like what you hear, raise your green card. If you don't like what you hear, raise the red card. And please return them to the back because if it works, we'll use them again. And if it doesn't work, we'll collect them early. So we are trying something new. So please, the most important thing, please be respectful to all speakers. If you have a different view, when it's your turn, you can ask a question. We will not tolerate personal attacks of any kind. This meeting, both Anita and I have wired microphones. We did not have that last meeting, so we had to wave or take somebody's microphone away. So if you say something inappropriate, we will come talk to you and ask you to take that conversation or those comments outside and come back when you're ready to listen. There's a big echo. Okay, so we're hearing there's an echo on the live stream. Okay, we're working on that. But since I'm going over meeting protocol, that's mostly for people who are here. So they're going to keep working on it before we get into meat and potatoes. So let me talk about the protocol. So if you do want to sign up to speak, please do so in the back. I do want to give a huge shout out to Ying Singh. Raise your hand, Ying Singh. Ying Singh is a volunteer. She's a Department of City Planning employee and engineer who works on air quality and noise issues. She also speaks fluent Mandarin, so she is going to work as our translator tonight. So even if you got here first and super early, once the community board has some of these questions addressed, we are going to have anyone who is a Mandarin speaker go first, so we don't keep her here all night long. So thank you for volunteering your night to help us out here. Meeting will end at 9:30, and we have a business session next July 14th. It'll be here, and you're welcome to listen, but that won't be open to the public. So I think if you only remember one thing tonight, use I statements versus you statements. So I don't like this. I think this. If you're talking about another person, you're probably going in the wrong direction. So keep it focused on yourself. Be brief, concise. We encourage questions. If you have personal statements, obviously we welcome those, especially if you haven't come here before. But we have the A team here from City Planning and HPD, so we want to make sure that we get questions answered. We need you to honor diversity of opinions and acknowledge that there are varied experiences, needs, and values. So please stay engaged, speak your truth, not someone else's. Expect and accept non-closure and listen for understanding. But most importantly, I can only control what's happening here, but I would say be respectful to everyone who's here tonight. And I know we can't control social media, but please be respectful there too. There are a number of seniors who said they were not comfortable coming tonight because of how they were vilified on social media. I just want to say that. So I'm going to ask everyone to be as respectful as possible, and thank you. So I'm going to turn it over to Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. My name is Edith Stella. I'm the director of the Manhattan office of the Department of State. It's extremely important about fostering more peace in New York City and about temporary NOHO. We are here to listen to your input, your opinion, your questions. We are here to provide answers to your questions, to give you information. We know that local voices are integral and central to the creation of zoning proposals that work for both the neighborhood and for the city at large. And we know you're passionate about your communities and about your care for the city. So again, I just want to stress that we're here for meaningful, respectful, civil conversation. We ask that, I wanted to point one thing out about mask policy. We ask.
Nice job, Jenny.
Sorry.
I don't know if anybody else. I can't quite. It's a little muddled.
What's all?
Is that better? Are folks on the back able to hear me speak?
You can hear you speak, but the mask is very muffled.
It's a little bit
muddled.
muddled.
Please let me say something about masks. I ask everyone to respect personal choices about keeping a mask on. We are in an indoor space. There are many people in this room. People have reasons for why they would like to keep a mask on. I see, for example, most of you have your mask on now. If there's a speaker who wishes to take their mask down,
Just a little bit.
I believe, one moment please. I believe that CB2 has a policy that they have about speakers and their masks. I am choosing to keep my mask on. I have my personal reasons. I don't think it's I need to say why.
That's
I will share with you
just lower.
that I have a 4-year-old at home who is not vaccinated. That is my reason. Others here may have their own personal reasons. Please, everyone, respect each individual's personal choice to keep their mask on
during the pandemic.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that.
Again, if you would just lower the volume, that's why we understand.
Well, we will ask you to help us with the audio. Community has really wonderfully engaged Greater New York and G to help with the audio. So we will turn to them to deal with volume and audio. I do not have that control.
That was
Thank
all.
you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yes.
Jenny, I've got 2 emails with the Zoom. It's not working.
Yes, and we've shared that with you. And if people have any questions, text Carter. I will not see your text or mine.
Yes, can you hear me? I think so. I just wanted to introduce myself. Janine is the chair of Community Board 2. I'm chairing the SOHO NOHO working group, and I wanted to introduce the committee for those who have not met us before. I don't know if that's possible. But go ahead, Eugene. Eugene, you raise your hand and say aye. Frederica Siegel, Michael Levine, Anthony Wong, Carter Booth, and Donna Ratney, and also Brian. Again, I'm going to say thank you to Edith, and nobody should have to explain why they're choosing to leave a mask on. There are all sorts of health reasons out there. My kids are 13 and 15. They are now vaccinated. So please, and that's totally changed how I live my life on a day-to-day basis, and I think people need to be respectful of that. So I want to talk about what we're going to what we're going to cover tonight. We're going to talk about 4 issues, the same issues we covered in detail at the last meeting. We're going to have upzoning. We're going to talk about the increase in bulk and density, affordable housing, proposed uses, and mitigation versus mechanisms. I just want to highlight questions that we heard from, many of them were coming in by email until about 4:30, 5 o'clock today. So if your question was emailed to CB2 and you don't see it on here, you can still ask it. We'll still address it tonight. Upzoning, we want to talk about landmarks in bulk. Will this create a citywide precedent for upzoning historic districts? The Phase 1 archaeological study recommends Phase 1B testing. How can the city require this on private land? Share preliminary recommendations and discussions between city planning and LPC. What is the zoning definition of celebrate? It's not in the zoning glossary, but it's in the DEIS 10 times, 3 times in the final scope of work, and 2 times in the draft scope of work, but 0 times in the proposed zoning text amendments. In terms of bulk, how are height and setback requirements modified for narrow streets? And why are West Broadway, Watts Center, Great Jones not treated as narrow streets? Why does DEIS underestimate total development on this? Because many estimates are there's over 4 million square feet of upzoning. And what protections can DCP add so there's no future changes for transferable development rights? For affordable housing, how many units of affordable housing are guaranteed? What displacement analysis has DCP completed? What are the impacts on seniors of 185 buildings that include rent-protected tenants? How many are occupied by seniors? Can the 2010 census data be updated with ACS data for people over 65? Has the New York City Department of Aging been consulted? And what is their position? Have seniors been solicited for feedback as proposed by the city's age-friendly NYC new commitments for a city for all ages? For proposed uses, we want to talk about sandwiching, and that's not what you pack for work. That's sandwiching uses within buildings, commercial, residential, maybe a physical cultural establishment, and because this was discussed in the advisory group. We want to talk about destination retail. We got a list. There's only currently 10 properties out of about 850 that have retail over 10,000 square feet. How will city planning address ongoing negative impacts for residents through zoning? Why are there no loading dock requirements? Why not the Hudson Square approach, which had a retail cap of 10,000 square feet other than grocery store and otherwise required a special permit, as well as for restaurants over capacity with 200. And why no charge for as of right? We want to talk about this is repeated, sorry about that. And what are the key assumptions for no action in the reasonable worst case development scenario for office space? It basically concludes there's no additional office workers. And then we talked a little bit about this the last meeting, why the carve out for the M15B blocks on the west side. And then finally, want to talk mitigation versus mechanism. I just like that alliteration. Chapter 21 of the DEIS is mitigation. We want to talk about open space. What are the options? In Hudson Square, which is nearby, there was a $5 per square foot for residential conversions, expansions, and new development for an active open space fund. And the money is supposed to be spent in the rezoning area, not broader. And then we have 3 other areas: historic and cultural resources, transportation, and construction. I'm going to turn it over to Anita. We can talk a little bit about the, do you want to?
Yes, I don't know that I really have their sign-in cards. The one, so there is someone from the Chinatown. Welcome to Chinatown.
How many people want to speak over in this group? Oh, okay. Well, that'll be.
Come on up if you'd like. We're not timing.
No, we're not going to time. We're not going to time the speaker because we'll have Chinese and then English and so forth.
but I can do it on my
大家
phone.
好，我叫曹启明，我是83、85高岭街住客委员会的一个代表。
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. Like the gentleman's name is Cao Jingming. He's like the title. He's like a renter association chairperson at the address is 8385 Bowery Street.
我是非常的不自在。今天我们这个唐人街的一些住客、工人都感到非常的不受欢迎。整个过程我们都没有人可以帮我们翻译或者解释给我们知道这个会议是怎么样。我也是非常的困难得到这个消息，今天有这么重要的一个会议在这里召开。所以呢，我们也是在最后的时间一些住客、一些工人就过来参加这个会议，要表达我们的意见。
So like we feel it's hard for us to really take participation in the whole process. So we were not really notified, or we didn't know this important hearing until the very late. And then so we try to gather together with a few people here to take part of this hearing.
那现在这个SOHO NOHO 的委中理将会把这个包括唐人街部分都会建高阿中这个地区，那么这个将会对我们社区有很大的影响。现在是疫情的期间，我们很多的小商户都因为疫情正在垂死挣扎，希望说可以保住这个社区。
We think like quite a part of Chinatown will be included in the upzoning project, and then it will affect like the Chinese community who live there, within not only the renters but also the small business owners. So after the pandemic, we're still in this pandemic, and then a lot of our small business are really struggling to survive.
第二社区委员会应该在中文的媒体告诉华埠的一些居民，我们要知道这个会议，不然的话，我们真的今天很多人都不知道今天有这个会议，而且这个会议现在所讲的，在阿中这个地方呢，只是造福一些地产开发商，让他们赚大钱，但结果呢，会把我们整个地区的地税飙升，租金飙升，很多现在小商户都已经因为这个疫情关门了。所以我们现在很多，你现在再搞这个所谓的那个土改方案，我们就整个我们都担心唐人街都被赶掉了，以后就没有唐人街了。
Like we hope like all these like public participation, like public engagement events will be posted or like published in Chinese media in advance, so we'll be able to learn about it in a more timely manner. And another concern for us is like this upzoning will bring more development. Obviously, it will benefit the real estate developers. However, we are concerned about the increase in property tax and also the rents. So yeah, we are worried like the high tax and the rent will price us out.
而且讲到那个可负担房屋，我觉得这些都是假的可负担房屋，好像现在我们所看到的，在那个唐人街下东城。所谓的可负担房屋都不是我们可以负担得起的，而且这个只是拿出一点点这些可负担房屋，越来摧毁我们的社区。我觉得这个计划应该马上停掉。
Like in regards of affordable housing, so it's like it doesn't really solve our problem. It's not really affordable to a lot of people from our community. So it's like a token, like with some affordable units here as a token. But in the end, I think the higher price will still hurt us.
今天我们很多这些华人大家各族裔的人都在，我们都想保住我们的社区，所以我们今天冒着大风大雨都跑过来，所以应该我们希望你们真的要听取社区的意见，谢谢。
And like here, our Chinese community and other community members, like from other groups, we are all here. Like our purpose is to protect our community. So that's why we made effort to make it to this hearing. And we hope to work together with other communities together to reach our goal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you, Yusing. Is there anyone else who needs translation services? Okay.
So this is the portion where we will be asking our guests to respond to any specific questions that we might have. First, we'll have the committee ask questions, and then we will go to the public members to speak out. Do any of you have anything that you'd like to ask?
Do we have any answers before we go to questions?
We have this question for the committee.
Yeah, I'm trying to.
Okay. The first question is, will this create a citywide precedent for upzoning other historic districts? I don't know.
Hello, can you all hear me okay? In the back? Okay. Thanks for the question, and thanks for CB2 for having this meeting. Before I answer this question, I want to thank the gentleman who testified earlier. I do want to just first say that this is a community board 2 hearing, and in advance of the City Planning Commission hearing later in the process, we will work towards spreading the word and translating materials in Chinese, and then to facilitate better participation and easier participation for Chinatown residents. I just want to note that. So in terms of the question, I want to say that as we've noted in past meetings and presentations, we know that the city is in a housing crisis, and then there is an equitable housing production picture in cities, right? In our city, and there are neighborhoods that lag behind other communities in producing housing, including marketed housing and affordable housing. So we think that, regardless of whether an area is within historic district or not, we should look at neighborhoods, look at areas where there are opportunities, and see how we can use the tools we have to support housing and housing affordability. Yeah, I guess my answer to the question is we are, historic districts in and of themselves do not mean that there shouldn't be, a look at the zoning and to be looked at in terms of providing additional housing and housing opportunities. I don't think, we're, differentiating areas based on whether they're in historic districts or not when we look at the housing picture in our city as a whole.
Well, let me ask a follow-up to that. Maybe you can,
can I say something really quick?
Pardon me?
Can I say something really
Sure.
quick? So, sorry, I just want to note that in the historic cores, which are outside of the corridors like Broadway and Canal, which are slated for an M15 R7X zoning, those are not being upzoned. Today, under M15A and M15B regulations, the maximum FAR is 6.5. And under this proposed zoning, the maximum FAR is 6.5. There is no upzoning.
Thanks, Andy.
So that
Thanks,
I just
Andy.
wanna,
And
let me just clarify, because when let's try not to use the word lie. I'm gonna just want to ask for clarification. So it's my understanding, I don't have the before and after slide up here, but M15 R7, I guess there is a slight, I mean, you're saying that, so the pink is not being upzoned, but the blue is. Is that what you're saying? Okay. Let me ask, so in the, I can't remember if I read it in the DEIS or in the final scope of work, but it talked about that there's meetings with city planning. I guess it was in mitigation. City planning and LPC will be meeting and coming up with preliminary recommendations, but it seems like after this process. Can you take us through which meetings have taken place so far and how those discussions are going?
Yeah, so as part of, this is a typical process, part of environmental review. City planning in this case is the lead agency for environmental review. We have established processes in working with other agencies, expert agencies, to review specific chapters. So in this case, historic resources is one of the chapter required to be. Okay. So as part of that, city planning, not only the borough office as well as our environmental review division have had discussions with LPC to look at the project, and they've reviewed the historic chapter.
How can the community board opine on the impact on historic districts without knowing what those discussions, what's going to be the result of those discussions? Because it's very open-ended in the DEIS.
Right, because it's part of the process, right? I think what's what is in the DEIS is reflective of the information shared and reviewed by LPC. And we are in the middle of the environmental review process now that the DEIS has been out there. And then once the project is coming back to the City Planning Commission for a hearing, it is also a hearing on environmental review on the DEIS. And that's an opportunity. So between now and then, it's an opportunity for folks to review the information in the DEIS. And then the hearing for the DEIS will be an opportunity to provide additional input, ask questions, and get those questions answered in writing. And then, meetings like this hosted by Community Board 2 are also opportunities to look at the information.
So the other landmark related question is that the phase 1A archaeological study recommends a phase 1B testing. And given that all of the sites, the projected sites, majority of those that would be impacted by this, how can the city require phase 1B when the archaeological study recommends this?
So unfortunately, our environmental planner wasn't available to come here tonight, but there's currently no mechanism in zoning that requires private landowners to conduct a phase 1B archaeological study. It doesn't exist.
Okay, and then I know we want to focus our questions on the actual documents and the wording. I know there's been elected officials who use the word celebrate. and is used several times in the DEIS and the final scope of work. So what is the zoning definition of celebrate?
This is a good question. I would say that there is no zoning. The reason that we talk about celebrating arts and culture in the context of the SOHO NOHO. This is a good question. I would say that there is no zoning definition for the word celebrate. I think the reason that we talk about celebrating arts and culture in the context of the SOHO NOHO neighborhood plan is that we are, in the new proposed zoning, we are introducing a number of provisions that will continue to build on the 1971 GLWQA provision and existing regulations and to bring it forward, right? One way is to allow a wider range of uses that include arts and culture uses. Two is connecting kind of the existing realities of JLWQAs with future support and resources for arts and culture. So the Arts Fund, for example, is a provision that helps realize that over the long term. And in non-zoning speak, we think that is one way of celebrating arts and culture, and we,
So it's a tax? Celebrate just means tax?
It is not the tax.
Okay.
It is a mechanism to convert existing JLWQA for those who need it and want it into regular residential use. It's about, connecting the lifting of a restriction that is about artists to connecting the lifting of that restriction to, resources for the arts over the long term. And John spoke about the, kind of the nexus and the zoning rationale for that in the last meeting.
Are there any other landmark related questions? Want to jump to bulk issues? Sorry, I just flipped to the arts fund. It's pretty snazzy using this on my phone. It's just not very fast.
Using this on my phone, it's just not very fast. In terms of bulk, the height and setback requirements are modified for narrow streets, and the question is, why are West Broadway, Watts,
narrow streets?
No? Okay. So those streets that were called out just now, we are treating them as wide streets. By the way, the definition of a wide street is 75 feet. So anything below 75 feet is considered a narrow street. Anything above that is considered a wide street. Those streets in particular were called out because they are just under 75 feet, typically 73 or 74. In one case, 74.5. So we believe that these behave more like wide streets because of the traffic.
Please be. Yes. How is the 75 measured?
It's the public right-of-way, so it includes the street bed and the sidewalk.
It includes the sidewalk.
And the sidewalk. Also, we considered the grid in some parts. A lot of the blocks and lots are shallow, narrow, have sort of strange configurations. And we believe that sort of relaxing those rules just a little bit will provide sort of a more appropriate sort of configuration of buildings on those lots.
So, to be fair, we looked up the street width on the street map, so these aren't going to be precise. But for example, Crosby Street, the actual street bed is 50 feet wide, so we don't know how, so the street, not counting the sidewalk, is substantially smaller than 75 feet. And Spring Street as well, as you can see from the slide, Watt Street 65. So Watts Center and Broome and Great Jones are getting a little bit closer to that 75 foot, but Crosby and Spring Street in particular, Crosby is north-south and Spring Street is east-west, are both 50 feet. So those seem well under the 75 feet, even when you add the sidewalk.
Right, so Crosby and was it Mercer or
Spring.
those are being treated as narrow streets for the purposes of setbacks.
Perfect. Okay.
Right, so Crosby and was it Mercer or
Spring.
those are being treated as narrow streets for the purposes
Any,
of
okay.
setbacks.
Let's go into, for affordable housing, sorry, I'm gonna go back to that slide. Yeah, I'll just read it and then we'll,
Let's go into, for affordable housing.
How many units of affordable housing are guaranteed?
Yeah, I'll just read it.
Process. Affordable housing, how many units of
Hello.
affordable housing are guaranteed?
If there is any residential development, if there is no development at all, if there's no residential at all, then there would be no affordable housing. But along with residential development within the rezoning area, the mandatory inclusionary housing program requires a certain percentage of affordable housing.
Unless it was built as commercial or it was not suitable for.
Like I said, if there is residential development within the rezoning area, then it will include affordable housing.
Quiet place, quiet exceptions commercial that are
Or it was not suitable
EIS.
for,
Like I said, if there is residential.
I think, sorry, I didn't mean to take the microphone from you. I wanted to ask for a clarification of the question. Is it about the MIH program itself, or is it about conversions that include residential would be required, with exceptions of very small buildings would be subject to mandatory inclusionary housing. And in SOHO NOHO, we are actually making the MIH program works better and stronger, taken into account the existing building conditions and unique regulatory context in SOHO and NOHO. And if folks are, asking about, as in prior meetings, about the various options in the MIH, I want to reiterate what Michael, elaborated last time at the Zoom meeting. These are not loopholes. MIH is a program that is designed to work primarily for on-site affordable housing provision. And I'm going to turn it over to Eddie Almonte from HPD to speak more on that.
Hello, can everyone hear me? Hi, I'm Eddie Almonte. I work for HPD, and thank you for having me to answer these questions. So as to quote-unquote loopholes, there are options where a developer can provide affordable units by either having a payment in lieu or an offsite option, and these options have a very high bar for requirements that to date no developer that with an MIH project have chosen to provide options offsite or do the payment in lieu. It is a very high bar. The payment in lieu is very expensive, and for the offsite option, if for any reason, for any very particular reason that a developer cannot provide the affordable units on site, they would have to find a second site that's within half-mile of the original district, in this case, Community District 2. And on top of that, they would have to provide an additional 5% affordable units in that project. So if we were to have option 1 of MI8, affordable housing is much needed.
Okay. Why don't we hit on some of the affordable housing questions since you have the microphone with these changes?
Yeah, thank you for your question. So we already we've on-rent stabilized unit, and I see from the text that you have here that you're probably already read it, but there are 185 buildings in the rezoning area in fact sheet, and I have physical copies here if anyone needs more to know. One is that of a large majority of the 185 buildings, around 94%, are considered to be not significantly underbuilt. So that means they are still under 50% of their, or over 50% of their capacity under the permitted density. So that means that there is no huge incentive to demolish or redevelop these buildings that have rent-stabilized units. And another takeaway.
Can I just jump in there?
Yeah.
Where is this sort of 50% threshold? Have there been studies that a building can only be doubled in size, the economics aren't there for tearing it down? I mean, can you just
refer to DCP with that information, and we can follow up with more about that.
And by the same token, those buildings that may well be developed, because there's a lot of advantages to developing low-rise buildings, is those tenants that are there now, they would be displaced. And what measures have you taken?
There are a lot of other facts in the housing fact sheet, and I have physical copies here. Yeah, that's a great question. We've already have a robust suite of resources and services for folks that are living in a rent that most of us already know about. But on top of the protections from the state law, HUD and city agencies have a suite of services that include the citywide right to counsel and the tenant helpline. So the tenant helpline is so that means that there is no the tenant
at the last meeting or been harassed by renters in they're paying very low rent and the owner would love. So there's lots of other activity so what else can we do other than right to counsel? And I mean, by the time you're getting to the point of calling the helpline, things are pretty bad. So can we get no harassment provisions put into these buildings? I mean, what kind of zoning protections can be included in this plan if it were to go through?
Yeah, I don't think you want to add to that. Those buildings are already providing a lot of advantages better than what you could maybe get into a luxury building with a certain percentage. So is there any way we can just avoid developing? I mean, if affordable housing is the motivator, then just leave it alone. Don't make it so
that's a great question. We already have a report.
Such an advantage to have the developer develop it, make lots of money, and provide smaller units at less neighborhood feel.
2019 state report. Okay, so reform to the state law.
Just giving Eddie a break here to pick up a few of the strands in the discussion. We at City Planning have also talked to the State Division of Housing, HCR, and want to make it clear that if any building with a rent-stabilized unit in it, if an owner wants to demolish it, even if that building is vacant, they need to go to HCR to get a demolition permit. HCR does not give out demolition permits unless every rent-stabilized unit is accounted for, either through normal tenant turnover or through the buyout provisions that you hear about. The point being that HCR, the ones in control of the rent stabilization law, make sure that there is no involuntary displacement from rent-stabilized units. And I've confirmed this recently with their legal team there, just to confirm. So that's a really high bar if units.
Can I just ask about normal tenant turnover? I currently don't live in a rent-stabilized unit, but I did for more than a decade, and keeps leaking until her roof falls apart. And then they have to actually repair it. And then they put beige tiles next to the white tiles in the shower, and it just looks horrible. I mean, these are all sorts of little things. There was a crack in my ceiling. I call about the crack. and they don't do anything. And then my entire ceiling caves in a week before my child is born, and I have to, at 41 weeks pregnant, sweep up the entire bedroom and vacuum up the dust before I bring a newborn home. These are all sorts of little things that pull up over time, and people sometimes they forget about it. I'm going to give it up, or I'm going to take the buyout offer, and they're not going to know that they need to hold out for longer to get a better buyout. So by the time the sort of normal tenant turnover, I just feel that that's sort of what else can be done in terms of these no harassment provisions.
That's a great question. The other neighborhood rezonings that have happened in the city have been placed into the Certificate of No Harassment pilot program, passed by local law and administered by HPD, created by a large working group of housing advocates across the city that improves upon earlier certificate of no harassment programs in the zoning, and that crunches huge amounts of data to identify particular buildings that are at risk of tenant harassment and to focus resources and energy on them. And so if those past rezonings is any precedent, SOHO will be one of a few neighborhoods around the city that is entered into that program that gets focused city attention around these very issues that you're concerned about. And then finally, when it comes to the question about affordable housing that exists in SOHO, there is no income restricted affordable housing in SOHO at all today, which is wild. Rent stabilized units don't have any kind of income restrictions on them at all. That doesn't mean that they're not a vital resource. But we in the city, in recent decades, find that actually providing income restricted units focuses that help on the people who need it most. And so we are really excited about this plan in SOHO NOHO to bring income restricted affordable housing to SOHO NOHO.
These are all sorts of little things. There was a crack in my ceiling. I call about the crack, and they don't do anything. And then my entire ceiling caves in a week before my child is born, and I have to, at 41 weeks pregnant, sweep up the entire bedroom and vacuum up the dust before I bring a newborn home. These are all sorts of little things that pull up over time, and people sometimes they forget about it.
So John, last time you were here, you said that these group 2 units were created through IMD process.
By the time these sort of normal tenant turnover,
I went and checked a number of them. They're all use group 17 units. I don't see use group 2 is being created through that process, especially since they require different building.
Yeah, I think I can address that. I think what we meant by the law process is not that you end up with a CFO that says use group 2. I think what we see in SOHO and NOHO, unlike other M districts, the law works kind of a little differently in other districts. In M districts, when you convert under the law, DOB does issue a use group 2 certificate of occupancy at the end of the legalization process. In SOHO NOHO, however, I think this is a DOB practice, and that the law board, in our conversations with them, also helped clarify that. Let me finish.
No, but you gave the same answer the last time. My question to you is the different building codes.
And then finally, when it comes to the question about affordable housing that exists in SOHO, there is no income restricted affordable housing in SOHO at all today, which is wild. Rent stabilized units don't have any kind of income restrictions on them at all.
I've never seen use group 2 listed
So we in the city, in recent decades, find that actually providing income restricted units.
Yeah, sure. I've seen many CFOs in M districts with use group 2 CFOs. You're putting me on a spot and naming a building certificate of occupancy. I don't think that's reasonable. I want to say that in SOHO NOHO, primarily buildings have certificate of occupancy listing JLWQA, but oftentimes you see a note at the bottom of the CFO saying that this is a unit or a building legalized under the law, therefore no art, even though it's a JLWQA, no artist occupancy is required. That I can give you an example of that CFO before, after.
Two units were
Yeah, and in other.
Use Group 2 is a different designation under the city. I mean, these are just
That's right.
the people who live here. This is incredibly important. And you're
That's
throwing around terms without that are not reflected on their certificate of occupancy.
I don't.
I mean, you guys say that an artist doesn't need to live there, but that does not make it Use Group 2.
The law process is not that you end up with a CFO that says Use Group 2. I think what we see in SOHO and NOHO, unlike other districts.
But you said the last time you were here that it's Use Group 2.
Differently in other districts and M districts, when you convert under the law, DOE does issue.
Is there a particular concern?
Well, sure. We want you guys
Below-
to get the facts right, and that's what everybody here who is behind me has lived through this. These are their homes, and you're coming and telling them, broad generalizations about specifics that aren't the case, and they are not Use Group 2. They are still under the provisions of the law law, and as a result, even though Use Group 2 is anybody who's gone through the legalization process, you know that Use Group 2 unit is very different requirements than Use Group 17.
I've never seen Use Group 2
Yes.
listed in any law.
The loft law bulk regulations are governed by the multiple dwelling law rather than the zoning provision. It's a provision of state law that the zoning can't touch. For the purposes of this rezoning and for the purposes of the conversion mechanism that we talked about, units that are legalized as residential through the loft law will not be subject to the conversion mechanism that we discussed last time. That was the relevance of that distinction. That remains true. If there are other concerns beneath what you're saying right now that we can address, let us know. But that remains, what we said last meeting remains true, that units legalized through the loft law will not be subject to the conversion mechanism.
Okay, and are there, I mean, you're very familiar with rent stabilization laws that were put forward. Are there any mechanisms where you can have somebody removed their...
Those provisions were removed in the 2019 reforms, I believe, so that's no longer the case. As many of you here know, there are buyouts in the loft law program, but for units that are in the loft law units that are in the rent stabilization program today, they will remain in the rent stabilization program after a rezoning is passed. And again, that's state law, and there's nothing that the zoning can do to affect the status of those rent stabilized units.
When a building's removed from IMD, they can't be bought out anymore, correct? When a unit, because then it's rent stable.
Yeah, again, we have had lots of discussions with the loft board throughout this process. But I don't pretend to be a loft law expert. My understanding is once during the legalization process, there are rules under the loft law, but then after, and tenants can be legally bought out in various ways. After a unit is fully legalized and unit is registered with the HCR to be rent stabilized, there's no I understand it to be regulated afterwards.
And so just going back, so up until 2019, housing in SOHO, NOHO was subject, rent stabilized units were subject to income restrictions, correct?
It was a provision in the rent stabilization law prior to 2019 that if a tenant income was above a certain amount for a number of years and the landlord petitioned HCR, that in certain instances you could remove a unit from rent stabilization. But that is certainly not what we are talking about when we're talking about income restricted affordable housing. I can be very clear about that.
And are there, I mean, you're very familiar with rent stabilization? Yeah, no, that was, and then I had a number of other questions, but I just keep it at this. What input is reflected in what we released in May from all the previous meetings that we
As many of you
since the
here
beginning
know,
of this process
there are
last year.
buyouts in the Log program.
You've heard
but for
lots of
units that
testimony,
are in the
and
items that are in the
it
rent
seemed to me there weren't many
stabilization today,
changes, even though
they
you
will
got a tremendous
remain
amount of
in the
feedback.
rent
I was wondering if you could
program,
tell us what
after
changed
the rezoning
from the
is
draft
passed.
scope
And again, that's state law. and
through
there's
now.
nothing that the zoning can do to affect.
What
So
else
that's
changed?
a one good example that I was going to talk about. You know, since the release of the draft scope of work, we continue to work on developing the proposal. We continue. It doesn't. It's really close. It is. Is this better?
Not as far.
Thank you. Since the release of the draft scope of work, we continue to work on developing proposal. As you know, in parallel with all of these meetings, we had a number of things were developed in that process. So there were details of the proposal, including the floor area, non-residential floor area detention scheme. There were a lot of questions about how that applies, what the thresholds were. We developed that. There were additional details about the JLW2A to residential conversion and art fund mechanism and how that would actually be administered and additional opportunities that will be afforded by that program. The changes that we're making to the NIH citywide program in the context of SOHO NOHO to make it better and work with the context in SOHO NOHO. We've added, further developed the specific bulk regulations. As you may recall, in the draft scope of work, we were looking at, you know, standard MX regulations and looking at additional context in the area. We fully developed the bulk regulations, and you can speak to the details. We also developed, you know, various use and bulk regulations that work to fully implement the goals of the proposal. We also heard comments on the draft scope of work, and there were some inadvertent errors in some of the chapters and reasonable worst case sites. We've made corrections in response to those comments. We've also, you know, that was traumatizing for everyone. I'm sure. I'm sorry. I'm not sure what happened. You know, a lot of comments we heard were also about things to be studied in the GIS. I think that's part of the environmental review process that is ongoing as well.
Yeah, I guess I just, you know, we had so many meetings that were supposedly getting input, and there just weren't many changes, and had heard from a lot of people.
Yeah, so that I will note that, you know, this is a continuation of the process that started a while ago, right? So we are in the process of Bueller, where, you know, after Community Board 2's input, we'll have a recommendation from the Borough President and the City Planning Commission, as it typically does, consider comments from stakeholders and viewer participants, and
Great.
very often you make changes
Yeah.
to the proposal.
Well, this is a perfect time for, this is a question that came in to the community board office. It's about sandwiching. And that's where you have different uses sandwiched together. And there was a long question, but the summary of it is, this was first raised by the advisory group in 2019. So this is a perfect time to ask this question since we've been talking about the process. So almost 3 years ago, the sandwiching issue was raised, and the proposal as it stands now basically allows sandwiching. So you can have an office, and then you can have someone's apartment, and then you can have another office. And on the same floor, you could have an office, an apartment, and possibly a PCE. So this was a big issue raised by the advisory group, and I just want to understand how it was incorporated into the final scope of work and the DEIS.
My under this mic is not very loud. My recollection of I'm trying.
Bob, do we have more batteries?
Okay, here you go.
My understanding. My understanding of, I'll try my best. I'll talk a little louder. My understanding of, kind of discussing different uses within in the same building, starting in Envision SOHO, NOHO, and now.
Give us a moment, we'll get a working microphone. Please be patient. Let me clarify this concern. I'm just going to read from page S19 of the DEIS. It would introduce greater flexibility, and for conversions, you could have commercial or manufacturing uses can be located above residential uses, and for new the concern is frankly quality of life and noise in mixed uses. So an office or a bar or a restaurant or it's quality of life issues because people live in these buildings, and if you're mixing the uses in a sandwich way, the residents a slice of cheese and the turkey and tomato might be a little noisy.
Sorry for the inconvenience. It seems like the live stream mic is not syncing with the main mics in the auditorium.
rent-regulated units laws. We see buildings with rent-regulated units being demolished in our neighborhood all the time, where there are FAR allowances like the ones proposed here. Often that means tenants being harassed or pushed out. But even if they are legally bought out, the upzoning is basically subsidizing developers buying rent-regulated tenants out of their homes so that they can be permanently removed from the affordable rent regulation system and demolished. And for what? For buildings which at best have 3 times as many luxury condos as new affordable units, and more likely has few or no affordable units due to the multiple loopholes generously offered by the city. The rent laws passed in 2019 mean our current rent-regulated units should stay affordable permanently, even after current tenants leave, for future generations to benefit from. That is, unless they are demolished. The one way they can be removed from this system, which this plan makes almost inevitable in all too many cases. That's why our city and our state's largest housing and tenant groups and the Chinatown Working Group have come out against this plan, and you should too. Thank you.
I think this works now. Testing.
I'm the executive director of the NOHO bid. I was a member of the advisory group too, and I've been deeply engaged in this process from the beginning. I have attended almost every Zoom meeting and heard the many concerns over this plan. I have also heard some very good ideas for compromise to address some of those concerns. Tonight I'm here because I want to state that everyone knows there are some real and find compromises in the plan. We know that these issues aren't easy to solve, but the ideas out there are out there, and I believe we're almost there if we work together. The NOHO bid's goals and criticism of this process have been centered around retail use in our buildings. We have to say here that we're happy to see the plan makes retail as of right and ends the arbitrary 10,000 square foot size limit in retail that makes no sense due to the sizes of many of our building floor plates. We have said since the beginning that retail is in a major flux, and property owners and retail uses need to be flexible to how they use their space because as time and trends lead them. COVID has only made this more true. The NOHO bid also feels very strongly they want to preserve the historic character of the district and are concerned with the level of upzoning currently proposed.
5 seconds.
We have seen alternate FAR numbers that are more realistic, and we hope that city planning will consider them. We believe there's a way to do this, so let's work together and get it done.
Thank you, Cordelia. It's not working.
I'm Mark Rivera from Village Preservation, and I want to speak to 2 more of the many lies that are being spread in support of the proposed rezoning to justify the shocking developer giveaway that this plan entails. First lie, that if the zoning is not approved, no housing will be built in SOHO upcoming. Give me a break. About 60 new buildings have been built in SOHO and NOHO in recent years under the existing rule, many of them residential. 100 more units of housing have been created from the conversion of existing commercial manufacturing buildings. And ironically, the same administration that claims to care so deeply about affordable housing approved many of these developments
Okay, we're done now. Thank you. Can please wrap it up? Okay. No, your time's up. So thank you. Okay. Eugene Yu has the timer. When you're down to 10 seconds, he's just gonna wave his hand a little bit. Little jazz hands or some visible symbol. Okay.
Hello, testing 1 2, testing 1 2.
Okay.
Is that good? No? I don't think.
We're still. Thank you, Z. Okay, go.
Do you want me to go?
Yes.
All right. Good evening. My name is Mark Dykes. I'm the executive director of the SOHO Broadway Initiative, the not-for-profit that manages the neighborhood-focused business improvement district along Broadway from Houston to Canal. In 2019, during the Envision SOHO NOHO process, the SOHO Broadway Initiative adopted and released a series of planning goals that outline our priorities for the future of SOHO Broadway. These overlapping goals are supported by our board, which includes both residential and commercial stakeholders, exemplifying the unique character of SOHO. Since the zoning text was certified last month, our board's planning committee has been studying the proposed language and monitoring the community board meetings where feedback from the community has been presented. While we generally support the changes that legalize retail and residential uses to facilitate the long-term recovery and health of SOHO, we oppose provisions that would interfere with SOHO's historic district and balanced mixed-use character. Therefore, we recommend modifications to the proposed text to better align building height and size with the existing building stock in the historic district. Additionally, we believe that the retail should be allowed without restriction, size, or otherwise on the second floor and below, and that above the second floor, retail uses should be limited to low-impact uses such as yoga studios, spas, hair care, and galleries. In addition, we believe that the proposed Arts Fund is an insufficient and unsustainable approach for arts and culture in the neighborhood. We would like to work with the city and the community to explore alternatives to develop robust tools with public funding and a defined focus on SOHO and NOHO's particular artistic character that would complement the zoning proposal. Finally, we believe that a rezoning of this magnitude must be accompanied by a thoughtful and comprehensive set of non-zoning tools to address the daily conflicts that are inherent in our unique mixed-use district. This coordinated approach should address quality of life issues by reducing vehicle congestion and addressing garbage collection, light pollution, and delivery issues. Thank you for your time.
Mark, have you submitted a written testimony?
I have copies of it with me tonight, if you'd like me to share it.
Email it is probably even better.
I will email it to you. Thank you.
Please do. I'm going to call the next 5, and then I'll have you speak. Lorna Tenenbaum, Lee Beneke. Raise your hand if you're not here. No, I'm only kidding. Jenny Lowe. Is she here? Harrison Brennan. Andrew Stern. Andrew, are you here? Come on up and please continue. Go ahead, Sam.
Can you hear me? Okay. My name is Austin Selson, and I'm an NYU student studying urban design. For one of my research abstracts in this past May, I was required to... Louder? Okay, sorry. I was required to look at a study from the Manhattan Institute in 2019 examining the issue of mandatory inclusionary housing.
Stay close to the mic.
Okay. I've often heard many complaints about the failures and the shortcomings of the mandatory inclusionary process, which I do agree are very true, but it's also important to look at why these failures exist. According to the study, one of the biggest issues with the mandatory inclusionary housing process was where it was implemented. East Harlem, Inwood, Bushwick, Grand Concourse, Jerome Avenue, all lower market areas where the housing being built required massive subsidies or could not be sustainable. And their recommendation was to shift this process to areas with higher market, higher demand areas. And they explicitly listed SOHO and NOHO. I do think that there are a couple of improvements that can be made to this plan. Firstly, I think that everyone can agree, if you're for or against the plan, that the commercial carve-out might incentivize commercial development when the focus should be housing. Another carve-out that I think should be changed is the percentage of affordable housing. We can use Gowanus as a prerequisite. Gowanus was able to produce 3,000 affordable units out of a grand total of 8,500, whereas this plan only has 900 out of 3,500. I could joke around and say 1,000 is right there, but truth be told, 1,050 is 30%, and 1,225 is 35%. Or you could even add bulk and add 400 units on top of the 3,500 to get 1/3 affordability. SOHO does not exist in a bubble, and the actions taken here will have implications around the city. So for that, I think all around that the rezoning would be better than upholding the status quo that we have seen for decades in this neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're the second closest thing to Eric Kober. I did read that report that the Manhattan Institute wrote, so excited that you studied it. One of the conclusions is to make rezonings effective for affordable housing. I'm just reading from the summary. New York City needs to change MIH so it will work for all types of housing, including conversions, small buildings, and giving New York State the city authority to tailor tax exemption programs to be consistent. So even though it talks about using MIH in higher, in more expensive neighborhoods, quote unquote, it did also talk about the need for further subsidies. So can you just shed a little more clarity on that?
Absolutely. So part of the issue was also, as you mentioned, utilizing other forms of non-traditional housing, which was prominent in the mayoral campaigns, SROs, temporary dwelling units, underground units, legalizing that process for not just new housing, but all kinds of housing. The priority should be to maximize the amount of housing that we have. It should not be a zero-sum game. As you stated correctly, they do suggest using non-traditional methods, which absolutely should be utilized, but that should not come in lieu of new development. And I would also like to point out an MIT study that was released a couple months ago that also stated that even building just market rate units would be substantially better for the housing, but of course, we shouldn't just be building market rate units. We have the chance to build a lot of affordable housing here, and this is an opportunity that we should not let go to waste.
Thank you very much.
No problem.
Thank you for providing this. Wow. Okay, so ready to start. Thanks. My name is Laura Tenenbaum. I was so very tempted not to come today. I had all these excuses in my head. I was feeling ill, my arthritis was acting up, city planning and maybe even our electeds are turning deaf ears and don't care anyway, so why show up? Truth is, I feel uncomfortable being here, not safe. I feel targeted. Targeted because I'm elderly. Targeted who made it happen despite city planning and city council consistently approving special permits that ate into the ability to be that creative community. Yet we persisted. You saw many of us, the tip of the iceberg 2 weeks ago. You can see that many of us were too afraid to come back. You saw us at numerous Envision meetings to talk about how to make SOHO better. We listened into and tried to get a chance to speak at Zoom meetings with city planning during the pandemic, only to hear the same people being called on over and over again, and to not see one iota of change in the zoning plan based on our testimony or substantive answers to our questions. So why did I come? To say this plan and the DEIS are flawed beyond redemption. What we have here is a wild land grab to benefit the big real estate investors, many of whom highly leverage themselves to buy properties in SOHO and are in trouble. It is an irresponsible plan, a greedy plan, a wolf wrapped in sheep's clothing plan, pretending to be something it is not. Affordable housing? The alternative plan I support guarantees deep affordability. The city plan does not. Truth is, anyone who knows SOHO knows this plan, based on data gathered during the pandemic, is a hideously deficient plan. We are a community starved for open green space. City planning recognizes the plan will make this condition considerably worse, doesn't care.
Okay, thank you,
I have 2 more sentences. Okay. I'm just going to say, just please scrap the whole thing, do it over, make it right.
Go ahead, please.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry. I just want to make a brief clarification on, the notion that the DEIS is flawed because we use pandemic data. I just want to say that the Mayor's Office of Environmental Coordination and expert and city agencies work together to create standards to conduct environmental review during the pandemic. And it goes well beyond SOHO, NOHO. It's not just for this project. And we're confident that the protocol provides the right baseline, a reasonable way to proceed with environmental assessment. And my understanding is that overwhelmingly the data sources are from pre-pandemic. So I just want to make that clarification. Thanks.
Can you share that Mayor's Office review? Whatever the standards for environmental review with us?
I would defer, yeah, we can follow up afterward.
Go ahead.
Okay. My name is Lee Benke. I'm an artist and a long-term resident of SOHO. I've lived and worked in my loft legally since 1984, and I'd hoped to live there while aging in place. I tried to speak at the last meeting, but it was so late when I was called that I gave an abbreviated version of what I wanted to express. So I'm back tonight, although I'm uncomfortable being here. There are 2 specific issues I want to raise with you. I live on the Broadway corridor, where I moved legally before there was any retail there. So I've been living there legally. The retail is not really legal. I've lived with the onslaught of bigger stores, and I was a co-founder of the Broadway Residents Coalition, which we organized as a first attempt to find a comfortable situation with increasingly aggressive retailers and delivery schedules. I live on the 3rd floor. My only window faces the street in a very big loft, and it faces this really noisy retail corridor. The proposed removal of the special permit requirement per ZR 74922, along with the as-of-right allowance and the expansion of this impactful use, is misguided and will make mixed usage a joke for the residential tenants. The special permit for large destination retail should be maintained. And the second thing I wanted to address, which I'm a little less passionate about, I'm really passionate about keeping the retail as it is now for those of us who live in mixed use on the corridor. We've been there longer than they have, and we should have our rights respected too. I also wanted to address the flip tax, the $100 square foot tax. It's going to break me. I'm a middle-class senior citizen. To do that, and also to go through the issues that Carter was talking about before in terms of what will be required to make my building legal for the people who are non-artists, it's probably going to cost me $500,000. I don't have it.
Hi, I'm Jenny Lowe. I'm a longtime resident of Little Italy and Chinatown, and I'm currently the state committee person of 65 Assembly District. I am here to speak against the plan as currently presented. It will change the characteristic of SOHO, NOHO, and further down here, to my neighborhood forever. And the current plan of allowing buildings to be built the way it would look, it would be just like any other part of the city or Manhattan. And the current plan does not have enough affordable housing for those who have either currently living there or will like to move in there. I saw a sign earlier about NOHO, not nursing home. We need to make sure that our senior can age in place regardless of where they currently live. That includes SOHO and NOHO. And so we need that plan to be scrapped, and we start with real input, transparent input from the residents of the community. That's the only way development can happen in our city, and I strongly oppose this plan. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Harrison. It's my first time talking to a mic since I was on radio in college. It's kind of weird. I'd like to thank the city planning staff for being so professional through this whole process. It's somewhat ridiculous that we don't just let professionals do their job and require them to do all this. We wouldn't do this for a sewer main, but we do it for this, so here we are. This rezoning is quite frankly desperately needed. SOHO is 77% white. SOHO is some of the most expensive housing in the world, and there's no reason not to build here. Quite frankly, my coworkers who are older than me and who have children can't afford to live in New York. All of them live in New Jersey or in Long Island, and it's horrible that we don't let people raise families here. It's ridiculous that we have made the city so expensive by refusing to build the housing that we need. We need to build housing throughout the city, not just in SOHO and NOHO, but we've been ignoring these rich white neighborhoods because they have political power, and it's time for that to stop. Can you let me speak, please? Yeah, okay, sure. According to the city's demographic analysis, this rezoning area is 77% white, compared to about 32% for the city as a whole. For example, Jersey City, which is one of the only areas in the tri-state area that builds enough housing, is 35% white. Long Island City, which has built most of its housing in the past 20 years, is 45% white. So not allowing development in SOHO also is a good way. As far as things that I would like improved about the rezoning, I think that the community preference, 50% being given to Community Board 2, I think that you could expand the area that includes to include Chinatown, so that Chinatown residents could also have a chance at all this affordable housing and not just people who already live here. That's it.
Hi, I'm Andrew Stern. I live in the Village and I work in the arts and media. I'd like to advocate for the unique culture of SOHO and NOHO, and I want to see the artistic community thrive for decades to come. Over the past several decades, we have seen creators, artists, and queer communities forced out of SOHO and NOHO. In that interest, I'm firmly in support of the NOHO and SOHO rezoning. When we talk about neighborhood character, are we talking about creating an environment where artists, queer people, and working class people can live, or are we talking about limiting building height? I want to see a SOHO that exists for families and for middle-class people, and I believe that allowing new housing units, particularly affordable housing, will allow SOHO and NOHO to be a place for families, artists, and middle-class people to thrive. However, I would like to see some changes. Increasing the proportion of affordable housing would be fantastic, as would reducing the allocation to office densities. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Todd Fine. I'm a historic preservationist in the Little Syria neighborhood in the Lower West Side of Manhattan. Many people may not know Little Syria because it's been completely demolished by projects over the years, and I want to mention that because we take for granted that we have this beautiful historic districts in SOHO, but it's not necessarily going to last forever. And that leads to one of my major critiques of the environmental impact statement, which people really need to look at this environmental impact statement, because this is not a serious report. This is really a legalistic game based on artificial protections that don't deal with the issue at hand. And historic preservation is actually probably one of the worst areas in terms of what city planning has done. They never had a single session on historic preservation. They have height requirements that are massively in the historic core of 150 feet, 140 feet, which are way above the historic, streetscape of SOHO. Even the bids oppose this plan in the current formulation. So I don't know how, the city council member and the Manhattan Borough president are going to oppose it when the entire community is against it, the bids are against it. But the worst thing is that the landmarks preservation, they were asked about this. They said, landmarks preservation was working with us behind the scenes. But we've never seen anything. There's no more individual landmarks. There's no contextual guidelines, which were actually in the envision process. And you have the national preservation groups, all of the city preservation groups against it, and we just all pretend like historic preservation for this world-famous area, which brings millions of tourists to the city and is famous around the entire world, is not an issue. We're going to be a laughingstock in Europe and Asia. This is a terrible plan, and city planning is really playing with fire on one of the great jewels of world heritage. It's a shame for humanity, basically. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Spencer. I want to speak in favor of the rezoning. New York just elected a new mayor, Eric Adams. I didn't vote for him, I didn't rank him, but I do respect his victory. He was voted in by outer borough minority working class voters and a vast majority of public housing residents. Eric Adams greatly supports this rezoning. He has spoken a lot about upzoning wealthy white neighborhoods that have not been upzoned because they have the political power. Well, I think someone like Eric Adams wants to change that, and to give de Blasio credit, he wants to change that as well. I do think we should drop the commercial FARs in this plan and raise the residential FARs as high as possible. And I would like to get rid of the community preference. I think people in the Bronx should have just as big an opportunity to live in SOHO, NOHO as people that already live here. So yeah, and to speak on if we should do this in other neighborhoods, yes. Every single wealthy white neighborhood in New York needs to be upzoned a lot. If any of you cry bullies want to talk to me outside, you can come do that.
Hi, yeah. Thank you. I'm pleased to be recognized. My name is Dan Miller. My name is Dan Miller, and I'm a member of a group called Open New York. We advocate for more housing in the city because the city desperately needs more housing, more affordable housing, more market rate housing, more housing of all types, especially in wealthy white neighborhoods like SOHO. And a lot of people have addressed the issues of affordability, of racial justice that have led us to this rezoning. And I want to say that I'm a fan of the rezoning, but I want to speak onto the environmental grounds. I came here today on the subway, and I was really worried that I would be trapped on the subway because of flooding from a sudden storm. Those storms are getting more intense and more rapid because of climate change. Climate change caused by carbon emitted by human beings living their normal lives. Living in SOHO is an amazing way to cut your carbon footprint. The average SOHO resident has a carbon footprint that is 1/4 the size of the average American and 1/5 the size of the average resident of Nassau County. So people want to live in this neighborhood. You can tell because the rents are incredibly high. And they want to pay those high rents and lower their carbon footprint in the process. We should let them. We should build more housing so that people can be better for the environment. It's literally a win-win. And the only downside is that it might upset people who, for whatever reason, don't want to live next to a tall building. I frankly don't think that's very important compared to the immense risk of climate change, and I ask that you approve this zoning. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to testify tonight. My name is Encore Dalal, and I'm a strong supporter of the rezoning. I support the rezoning because it can help create over 3,000 new homes, including 900 new affordable homes, into incredibly wealthy, high-opportunity, transit-rich neighborhoods. While I would urge the city to reduce the proposed commercial densities to create incentives for developers to build residential housing, and while I would urge them to expand the community preference area beyond CB2, I'm otherwise enthusiastically supportive of a plan to create thousands of new homes in a pair of incredible neighborhoods. SOHO and NOHO are extremely wealthy neighborhoods that are far less diverse than the rest of Manhattan due to their unaffordable housing. 40% of the study area earns over $200,000 a year. Market rate 2-bedrooms cost over $8,000 a month to rent, and starter apartments to own are about $2 million a piece. As stated tonight, there are no income-restricted affordable housing units in the SOHO-NOHO study area, none at all. And DCP found that only 3% of the community board's housing consisted of government-assisted affordable housing. This is a wrong that I think we must correct. I know that some of the rezoning plan's opponents do not view this as an issue. Some have said so directly. In a front-page New York Times article from April 4th, a member of this community board's land use committee said that she felt that SOHO should not be responsible for producing as much affordable housing as other neighborhoods. I strongly disagree. Others don't see this as a problem because they acquired their homes at reasonable prices. I've had owners of multi-million-dollar lofts come up to me at these meetings and say that they are middle class because they bought their salaries, they bought their homes on low salaries decades ago. I don't begrudge anyone their home, but I do find it galling that many of the opponents are demanding that a city that offered them affordable housing when they were young block affordable housing for the next generation. I urge you to consider to support this plan. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Victoria Lee, the co-founder of Welcome to Chinatown and also the newly elected district leader for 65D. Welcome to Chinatown is a nonprofit supporting Chinatown small businesses with the mission to say that Chinatown will always remain open for business. We want to address some considerations for the rezoning. First, we want affordable units with lower income targets and community preference for affordable units to be extended to Chinatown. Chinese Americans are the ethnic group with the highest poverty rate in New York City, and affordable units built should serve working class Chinese Americans at the highest risk of displacement. This especially applies to seniors in Chinatown, who are a quarter of Chinatown's population, many of whom who live without elevators and are largely homebound as a result. Second, the rezoning should include an anti-harassment provision for any rent-stabilized tenants in the area and funding to empower other groups and not to allow solely for tenants to rely on a government hotline. I've seen this kind of harassment firsthand with a ruthless developer that made it relentless for my late grandmother, refusing repairs and letting her bathroom ceiling cave in to try and kick her out of her rent-stabilized apartment. This rezoning should not put others through this. Third, we do not want rezoning to open the door for more big box stores. The last thing that Chinatown needs is mega corporations next door that engage in unfair competition and predatory pricing. We do not want Chinatown businesses, we do want Chinatown businesses in rezoning area, such as any of our legacy businesses or food wholesalers vital to Chinatown's economy, to also have a place in newly constructed buildings, followed by the precedent set forth in the new Essex market. Thank you.
My name is Adam, and I'm a historic preservationist studying at Columbia University. I love being a student in New York because I get to study the world's greatest city. And SOHO is particularly dear to me because of the Little Singer building located in the very heart of SOHO. I wrote my thesis about its younger sibling, the Singer Tower, which was torn down in the 1960s. Tonight, several community members have discussed how this rezoning would threaten the historic nature of SOHO. I want to discuss that with a little history. The Little Singer building is a beautiful L-shaped building with an ornamental terracotta and lacy green steel facade. It is on a lot that is zoned M5, meaning that if the structure were built today, it could rise only 5 stories and would be used exclusively for manufacturing purposes. Of course, the Little Singer building is no longer a manufacturing building. It's residential, and it rises 11 stories, not 5. The 4-bedroom penthouse is currently listed for $11 million. I've not only read the entire DCP plan, but I have walked through this neighborhood. I've read the 4 LPC reports that cover 85% of the land that this rezoning targets. This plan would not destroy SOHO's historic districts. It would not damage this neighborhood. The plan would allow for new units of housing in the midst of a terrible housing crisis. It would bring existing structures like the Little Singer building into closer alignment with our zoning code. This plan is not going to turn SOHO into Midtown. It will complete SOHO. For nearly 100 years, the Little Singer building had a 1-story parking garage next to it. The beautiful street wall of impressive turn-of-the-century buildings was interrupted by a lowly parking garage. Finally, in 2000, a new building was built that paid homage to SOHO's distinctive architecture without being an artificial copycat. Another block of New York's most famous street, Broadway, had been completed. I look forward to seeing how the rest of SOHO gets filled in. We desperately need housing in New York, and I'm excited that it can be in such a special part of the city. I'd like to thank DCP for putting together such a nuanced and balanced plan, and I'd urge this community board to vote in support of this necessary rezoning that will complete SOHO. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Shelley Friedman. Some of you on the board may recognize me as a land use lawyer with experience in CB2 over the past 25 years, but may not know that my offices have been in the Prince Building in SOHO since 1994. And while I've provided advice to the SOHO, to the NOHO Bowery stakeholders, tonight I testify as a neighbor and a concerned citizen on one issue that affects us all. I think we can all agree that the existing zoning is a toxic brew of old policies and bad outcomes, and that the new initiative has a ways to go in dealing with many of the issues that have been raised here tonight by so many people. But I have heard that one option the working group may be considering is a resolution that, channeling Nancy Reagan, just says no to this initiative. I urge the working group to reject a thumbs-down approach and to submit as detailed a resolution as possible that will represent the group's thinking on what it likes, what it doesn't like, and what it wants to see changed. The community board must use its voice, because if it does not, others will fill the void your silence will leave behind. After your review, this proposal has a long public record to go, and without a substantive board resolution, any person or group will be free to put their words in your mouths, or worse, claim that they are the rightful voice for all of CB2. Framing a substantive resolution need not be difficult, but failing to do so will suppress the voices of all those who have testified before you on all of these diverse topics. Please use the powerful position of trust that you and only you have been given to speak for all of the communities in CB2 so that all of us will be on the record as the process moves forward. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Connie Murray. I am a former resident of SOHO NOHO, and I can't read my statement that I prepared for this meeting tonight because it doesn't fit the requirements that you guys presented earlier. So if it's okay, I'll email it to you. I want to honor what you're asking. But I think for the 2 minutes that the public is allowed to speak, I think that we should be able to say whatever we had planned to say, and I think if somebody's lying, we should be able to say that in a public meeting. During the Zoom meetings, I couldn't get to speak. I was like 354 on the...
Chinatown, Harlem, Bushwick, Sunset Park, and Crown Heights. We need more housing to ease the pressure of gentrification in these minority neighborhoods and to provide a better standard of living for all. I support the upzoning plan because we need both affordable and market rate housing. Thank you.
Good to go? Oh, beautiful. Hello there. My name is Will Thomas. I'm the Executive Director of Open New York. I live in the East Village, and I'm here to support the rezoning with 3 asks of the Community Board. First, while I know that many of us likely disagree on the merits of allowing new mixed-income housing, I hope we can agree that nobody on any side of the rezoning fight wants to see offices rather than housing. So I hope that's something you can include in your inventional resolution, that everyone agrees that commercial densities in particular are way too high and need to be lowered. In addition, we've been testifying for a pro-housing rezoning in front of you guys for over 2 years, and while I'm sure that many of you may disagree strongly with us, I hope deep down inside some of you may realize that we have a point, that SOHO is a wealthy, white neighborhood, that such neighborhoods have not generally built their fair share of housing, and also that more mixed-income housing here wouldn't be the end of the world. I know some organizations have tried to muddy the water here, but for example, according to the city's actual expert demographers, SOHO is 78% white and not a racially diverse neighborhood. The fact that some are willing to misrepresent that should have you questioning the fact that some are willing to misrepresent that should have you questioning what else they're willing to misrepresent. Lastly, when CB2 was putting together its last resolution on the SOHO rezoning, I made one ask that you include something on the need for more housing affordability in SOHO, which I imagine we all agree is a huge problem in the neighborhood. I really just like to see some recognition that you guys have wrestled with that consideration on affordability be given as much thought as aesthetics and historic districts. Again, I know we likely won't agree on everything, but I hope you can consider those few items for your resolution. Thank you. Yes. Well, the city's census data that they used is based on the actual rezoning area. The difference, you can either say that 78% is out of date and that the demographic data has changed radically within those years, or yes, but the other, but yes. Oh, no, I'm sorry. But so yes. Well, but I guess it's like if you're using the more accurate area, the more accurate block data, you can either say that that's radically changed within 10 years, or you can say that we want to look at a larger area. But my impression is that it has not radically changed within 10 years, and that including the outside data creates a lot of noise. But that's my impression.
Sorry. Okay. My name is Zella Jones. I'm representing NOHO Bowery Stakeholders, which is a community benefit nonprofit with a paid membership of more than 350 households. We are owners, renters, businesses, institutions, nonprofits, and artists. We represent more than 1 million square feet in NOHO. Our membership endorses improvements in 4 major areas of this special SOHO-NOHO mixed-use district proposal and advocate for one addition. We are clear that this must happen now. In brief, we have submitted to the community board and open to anybody else a full statement outlining our rationale and our suggested alternatives, and you can find it at nohomanhattan.org/WordPress. In brief, they cover bulk and height designations, which should be reduced in each zone with additional restraints on bulk in historic districts. Reductions in commercial and community facility FAR, replacing 6.5 with C2-5 or C27A overlays. This will maximize potential for affordable residential and truly reflect a more balanced mixed-use configuration. Artist, maker, and non-artist residence conversions, which need to be better respected in these considerations. It needs more study. A pathway for retail over 10,000 square feet with some use group restrictions and defined operating stipulations. And finally, the addition that we would ask for are stringent protections for existing rent-stabilized and protected, tenants, the language of which already exists in the Clinton Special District, and it's written into their special district. Thank you very much.
Good evening, my name is Michael McGuigan. I am a very long-time resident in the NOHO. I am an artist, a performing artist, and when I came into this neighborhood in 1979, it was affordable and it was very diverse. And I've seen it change over the many years. And I would love to have it more diverse. And I'd love to have it more affordable. I get that. But since it hadn't happened and the powers out of my control moved it to a much more expensive and wider neighborhood, I kind of doubt that it's in the interest, really, of people who are the developers, who have been developing and making it more expensive, or actually have the idea of turning it into more affordable housing and more diverse. I just don't get that that is what is baked into the proposal as it is now. I would strongly urge CB2 to absolutely take the comments and the suggestions that are coming from the people who don't agree that this plan is going to work as it is, to take those suggestions to heart. If there is a compromise that could be made, that's great. But if not, I just want to say that I definitely don't support this plan as it is presented. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Jeannie Wilkie, NOHO Neighborhood Association. Elliot Barrowitz, a senior in NOHO, asked me to make a few comments for him. He's an artist in NOHO, describes himself as one of the oldest housing advocates around, was on the original artist certification committee and early involved with our existing zoning, very involved with the loft board for the last 15 years. And I quote him, "Despite the Zoom meetings many months ago where the city was throwing bones to the artists and patronizing us but ignoring our real existence in the two areas, this is the only city in the Western world, Europe, and South America, and parts of Africa and the Middle East that would destroy an artist community. Remember, the artists made and founded the SOHO and NOHO that exists today." And on that, the question is, why has there not been an effort to take an accurate count of those who identify as artists in the community, a current count, despite repeated requests for almost 3 years? For my personal comments, unfortunately, certain interests are using divisive rhetoric as rallying and rebranding points for support of the upzoning with well-organized PR targeted at the people in our community. Residents of SOHO, NOHO, and surrounding areas from the Village to the East Village, Greenwich Village, have through history been the bastion of activists and social justice causes. Those who create through their art and the creative thinkers in the community have been in the forefront. Instead of letting these interests divide us with this rhetoric, we must focus what at the root is really a real estate giveaway coupled with loss of arts by attrition, decimation of an historic district, and the real possibility of displacing existing seniors, non-wealthy residents, artists, Chinatown residents, and small business. And on top of that, the affordable housing that there is no guarantee, and even if it will be truly affordable, that we call for. And one last comment, the 2009 city studies on the environment basically had this area and the Bronx as two of the hottest toxic areas from nitric oxide and several others than any other place in the city, and that should be noted. Thank you.
Good. Hi, I'm Dennis Griffith. I work on Crosby Street, and I'm a resident of CB2 just over the rezoning district boundary in northern Little Italy. I wanted to speak in favor of the proposal today. Well, it's not necessarily the proposal I would necessarily prefer. In some ways, I think it's not ambitious enough, and there's a real risk that we'll just see a bunch of office buildings without necessarily as much residential components like we have seen in some of the individual site developments that have removed a variety of community institutions around us over on, say, the Lower East Side. And so, in general, I'd like to see the board consider asking for more residential space, possibly more things to make it feasible to develop residential sites compared to offices. And I'd also like the board to remember that an upzoning like this in SOHO and NOHO may be a precedent for my own neighborhood, which I would like to see upzoned, but I'd like to see it upzoned, with an appropriately polite view sort of towards the rest of the city and the opportunities that we represent for people that are, like me, moving to New York for employment and, a better chance of life. Yeah, so I guess kind of time.
The 12th.
Thank you. Thank you, CB2, for this opportunity. Thanks to all the DCP and HPD, and for all your hard work. I'm Darlene Lutz. I am a longstanding member and of the SOHO community for over 40 years. I'm in opposition to this plan. It's clear our suggestions are not going to be incorporated. I'm calling on Gail Brewer and Margaret Shin. I hope they get the message to abandon any idea of supporting this as it stands. They were elected by we, the constituents, and there are not two sides to this argument. Over the past year, the community has been slandered in the media repeatedly, and the cesspool on Twitter is either instigating it or echoing much of it. The intimidation tactics by an outside group who come here and support are outrageously ageist and sexist. At the June 23rd meeting, I, a senior-aged woman, was lunged at and physically assaulted by a male group member who is more than half my age. 5 minutes after the assault, a board member of Open New York for All posted to Twitter, and I quote, "Next up is real Danny Sales, saying more residents deserve access to SOHO NOHO schools," drowned out by a slight kerfuffle with a rezoning opponent getting in supporters' faces to take our pictures and demanding we be kicked out or she'll call the police when we tell her to stop. End quote. Thanks, Amelia. Please read the New York open meeting laws and school your group next time. If you have a women's cart, now's the time to turn it in. Hopefully, I just want to wrap up. Hopefully this will settle somewhere into the recesses of the minds here tonight. This is a real and another layer of the entitlement, contempt, and full-on aggression this community has had to endure during this process. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me? Hi, everyone. Look, I will keep my comments very, very brief. I'd first like to say to City Planning, I'm not clear what makes you think that you have the right to do anything with 165 rent-stabilized buildings. You are not our Senate, you're not our Assembly, you haven't gone to a judge to deregulate, to target 165 rent-stabilized buildings. You are causing the housing crisis. Our taxes finance the fallout. We're spending billions of dollars a year. And what you've really done is chipped away at every regulation, whether it be the landmark laws, the loft laws, the rent stabilization laws, with no thought that in your quest to achieve market rate, you are displacing New York City residents as if we are, I don't know, dogs or fleas on the wall. When you look at the loft laws, we invested in community. We brought these buildings up to code. What I cannot wrap my brain around is why you think so little of arts and culture. We heard the governor say it 1,000 times. It is what makes us relevant. And you've taken the American fashion. You've taken all of our artists. You've taken specialty retail, tourism, the landmark laws, our historic districts, and you've turned it upside down. Lastly, I would finally like to say, in all of the years, the Senate hearings, the MIH hearings, the rent reforms, and of course, any tenant rally, I have never in over 20 years seen the elderly targeted. It is illegal. This plan cannot go through, and I think that you should all be ashamed of yourselves after what we saw happen. It's just wrong.
Good evening. It's freezing in here. I'm Amit Solomon, 14-year NOHO resident. I strongly support affordable housing in NOHO, but I oppose this rezoning plan, which will create none. I agree with the concerns from other residents as far as the density, height, character of the neighborhood, and affordable housing loopholes that will eliminate any possible affordable housing. I'll make 3 additional points. One, DCP's attorney, John Manchin, testified in the second public hearing that the proposed JWLQA conversion mechanism as proposed conflicts with state laws regarding co-ops and with co-ops' own bylaws. He admitted that the conversion discussion with the DOB was deficient. Should this half-baked conversion mechanism go into zoning, it will throw the market for these JWQA units into complete chaos. No one will be able to buy, sell, or finance those units. The proposed conversion fee, second, is $100 per square foot, is 7% or so of a unit value, more than twice what the city charges as mansion tax for sales over $25 million. It's outright cruel to residents, especially those who lost an artist partner that we've heard here. It is regressive and it is ransom. The fee is based on a study that hasn't been shared with us that claims JWQA units trade at a discount and will increase in value once converted. In fact, JWQA units trade at a premium and banks fiercely compete over financing them. Show us the study, John. Okay. If the test is an increase in value, the fee should be imposed on landowners, and big box retail will see most of the increase in value. DCP testified here that the conversion is optional, but the slide showed that it is required upon sale. So which one is it? Is it required?
Sure, we spoke to the study, I think, in various presentations and to the commission. We can provide further details when as a follow-up. I want to kind of clarify, and I think this is a point that we try to communicate last time. So there was a chart that shows, kind of upon sale, and there are two pathways for JLWQAs. I want to reiterate that's not part of the SOHO NOHO neighborhood plan. That's a graphic that was taken from Envision SOHO NOHO report that reflects kind of conversations happened during that process. And then as part of the SOHO NOHO neighborhood plan, this proposal, it is a voluntary option for those who want to convert JLWQA to residential use, and there is, it's connected to the contribution. So it's not, there's no upon sale requirement
So
for
why does it say time of sale or change?
Right, so this is a concept that was developed based on stakeholder input during Envision SOHO NOHO process. It's not part of the proposal. We included this slide to kind of remind folks about conversations that took place before the SOHO NOHO neighborhood plan. So this is not the proposal.
So the slide is wrong.
The slide is created to talk about past engagement efforts and conversations that took place that informed the proposal. But this is not the proposal. It's not wrong. It's to communicate a different point.
So since it's a concept, do you have more details that are...
Right, and then the actual proposal is in other slides following this one. And we can, yes. It is optional.
Okay. So you can sell your apartment to a non-artist and keep it...
You can sell a unit without, if you don't change, if you don't go to the Department of Buildings to change the certificate of occupancy to use Group 2, regardless of sale or no sale, there's no requirement for the artist's contribution. I just want to make that clear. So it is purely optional.
Hi, my name is Henry Schwartz. I've lived on Crosby Street for 25 years now. I'm the president of our co-op. We have a building with 5 apartments. 2 are artists. 1 has work in the Met, and 3 are not artists. I guess our whole building is on the losing end of this proposal. I moved here and picked SOHO 25 years ago because I liked it. My friend who lives on Crosby also, Brian Chadwick, made these signs, and at the last meeting at the very end went off on how this means you're going to put in Olive Gardens. I think he was very frustrated. I think what you can see, and I've managed to stay out of politics and zoning and all this bullshit for 24 years, and now I'm paying attention because it's going to affect the neighborhood where I live, where I have 2 children, where I started a business. And I love it. I mean, we stayed here through the looting in June of last year. It was horrific. We love this neighborhood, and I think a lot of people here do too. What you're hearing is that we're all afraid that this is going to harm what we like about SOHO. I think it's a little bit disgusting that some people come in that seem to have an agenda that aligns more with development, and they're like, yeah, we need more housing. That's really what we need, when this proposal might produce some housing and it might not. I want to take 30 seconds and talk about this mitigation of JL, joint living. Our building is 2,000 square footprint, so you're talking about a $200,000 fee, I guess, to fix the zoning that has been fucked up for 20-something years since they haven't certified artists. And this is what's really gonna hurt a lot of us. And basically, New York's a very high tax area. People are moving away. This just makes it worse. And I don't know if there's anywhere else where you can basically pay a bribe to change your zoning, but that's what it feels like.
My name is Denny Salas, and I support the rezoning of NOHO and SOHO. Look, we've heard this for over a year now, some of the problems, and I believe that the one commonality between opponents of the rezoning and supporters of rezoning is that the commercial density allowance is too high. And we believe that if you don't change that and lower it, then you're not going to be able to kind of encourage developers to build the affordable housing that's actually needed for everybody. We know that there's a 700,000 affordable housing shortfall across New York City, and the only way that we're going to solve this crisis is by building more. And so on that note, I just hope that DCP takes that concern from both opponents and supporters and actually lowers that commercial FAR so we can actually encourage more affordable housing to be built. Now, I've been lucky. Over the past year, I've been fortunate to talk to a number of actual opponents of the rezoning themselves. And I've been able to learn a lot about them, about why they moved to this neighborhood, why they love it here, why they want to stay, and why they have these justified fears about what the rezoning will lead to. And look, I'm better for it. And I'll tell you right now that the one thing that the rezoning can do, if commercial density FAR is lower, is offer working class families like myself the opportunity to learn from you and kind of hear your stories and benefit from it and be inspired by it just for the future for themselves. So then hopefully those working class families can live their American dream, experience upward social mobility, and have access to some of the best schools that the city has to offer. All right, thank you, everybody.
Hi, everyone. My name is Christopher Marte. Coming in today, I was debating whether I should speak or not. I've come to every single meeting. I ask the same questions. They never get answered. And so I wonder if today was going to be any different. But hearing from this first speaker, when he talked about displacement, and looking around this room and seeing a lot of the seniors who feared to come here and who fear what the city's going to do to them, which is going to lead them to displacement, I had to speak up for that. If the main purpose of this plan is to create affordable housing, we have to do a study on displacement, not just for the residents of SOHO and NOHO, but for Chinatown, the Lower East Side. We all know that this scope, the scope of study, is way too small. Most of the development projects are on Canal Street. When you say Canal, what do you think, which neighborhood do you think of? Chinatown. Why isn't that included? I think the city is excluding communities of colors like Chinatown and the Lower East Side because they know they will be displaced, because this is a developer-driven project. And so I ask every speaker today who opposed this plan, and some who do support this plan, have asked, what about displacement? And so as we move further in this process, that has to be answered. If you want any approval, if you want any support from this community, we got to make sure that a plan that goes through does not displace the seniors, the youth, the disabled out of this community. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I just want to, I know where everybody wants to go, but yeah, I just want to kind of just a point of clarification. So as part of the environmental review process in the DEIS, there is a study for displacement, and that does include a larger study area that goes beyond the SOHO-NOHO boundary. So Chinatown, for example, is included as part of that study. It is in the environmental review, and it's an ongoing process, as you all know. And secondarily, I want to address this, we understand that there is legitimate concerns around illegal, displacement of tenants. And we, as we noted before, as a city, we're trying our best, and we are here to engage with tenant advocates and people who really care about housing and tenant rights to see what the opportunities are here. I do want to note that displacement pressure increases when there's not enough housing for everyone that wants to live here. And primary way to address this, at least within the confines of how our economy works, is to build more housing in areas to reduce the pressure of displacement in surrounding areas. In this case, building more housing, allowing conversions to residential, in SOHO NOHO, and that actually reduces displacement pressure in surrounding neighborhoods and vulnerable populations. And that is supported by Where We Live report, that is supported by academic research. I just wanted to put that on the record. Again, tenant displacement and harassment is a real issue. We are here to talk to folks who care about that here as part of this process and beyond. And I just want to say that we know that a lot of you know that the community alternative plan is preferable. I think our perspective is that it doesn't, it encourages people to engage in magical thinking that is not rooted in reality. We don't think it will result in the kind of outcomes that, that folks say that it will. I want to say that, you know, I and my colleagues at DCP, we think that that is not a plan that is motivated by genuine concerns for displacement or, you know, a genuine desire to introduce more housing affordability. You know, again, we are here to engage with folks who care about housing, and we've heard housing advocates speak out today and in the process, and we want to make sure that we address real concerns. But at the same time, SOHO NOHO and many neighborhoods, including historic districts, should not be trapped in amber. There is a way to introduce equitable growth in ways that respect historic character as well. Thank you.
You guys, please. I am going to encourage people not, if you don't, back to the ground rules that I don't think are up anymore. Focus on the I statements, not the you statements. If you don't like someone is saying, don't refer to it as lies or magical thinking. Just stick to the facts. I do want to, since we're on affordable housing, I do want to just touch on some senior issues, and we read these questions earlier. Has the New York City Department of Aging been consulted, and what is their position on the impact on seniors? I'm not sure. Yeah. We've got two now.
We have, yeah, I don't think we have, as part of this process, engaged with the Department of Seniors, but we can certainly get that conversation going. I do want to say that, you know, even though there is a lot of misinformation floated out there for seniors and those who live in rent-regulated housing and loft law units, you know, the rezoning is not going to change or take away any of those protections. But I think that's a good flag. We'll coordinate with the relevant agencies.
Okay. Do you have anything else? Okay. I'm not sure what you're pointing to. I'm sorry. Okay, sorry. I do want to just, I want to briefly just address, because we didn't fully touch on it, is destination retail. So in Hudson Square, which I think you mentioned 2 weeks ago as they have a office space, the same office space provisions or similar. In Hudson Square rezoning, they kept the 10,000 square foot, the city kept the 10,000 square foot retail cap in place other than for a grocery store, and would require a special permit for retail over 10,000 square feet, as well as for restaurants with a capacity over 200. And I just want to ask, in what other neighborhoods do these still exist, and why was this not considered for this neighborhood plan?
Thanks for the question. I think I won't spend too much time on it since I've spoken about this many times. I think our starting point for SOHO NOHO in terms of commercial is to move away from the hyper kind of restrictive scheme and allow appropriate level of zoning flexibility to allow a wider range of uses and more diverse types of retail and eating and drinking establishments. Now, we're engaged in the Euler process. We understand there are a lot of concerns about some of these uses. So we encourage you to include your concerns and suggestions in your recommendation. I think that will be taken into account.
Okay, can I just jump in? I want to specifically, because last meeting we had talked about We got the list of destination retail. It's on the screen, and we'll send this to you after. But these are large retail establishments over 10,000 square feet. It's 11 sites out of 850 buildings. And obviously there's some that have been larger, broken into smaller. So there's a very small number. And back to Hudson Square, which is nearby, is just to the immediate west, has a 10,000 square foot cap in place. And that's a vibrant community. So I guess the question is, we were talking about flexibility and getting rid of the special permit for under 10,000 square foot. There's not a lot of destination retail. Why not just go the Hudson Square route?
Well, I think from our perspective, and I think you've heard from a member of the bid tonight as well, is that SOHO, NOHO are internationally renowned shopping district. We want to also recognize the retail sector and its contribution towards our local economy. Larger retail stores already exist in SOHO, NOHO. We want to update the zoning to reflect this existing pattern of a mix of large and smaller retail stores. So that's the starting point of the proposal. And that is very different in terms of retail context compared to Hudson Square.
Question? I'd like to follow up, please, with a simple question of clarification. Can you tell us what neighborhoods and what zoning around the city has had the cap lifted without the special permit requirement? So where else can we see that in effect in New York City? And there's a part two to that question. Are there special considerations if there is no special permit requirement where retail uses above 10,000 square feet are allowed as of right? What are the locations and what are the conditions for the use, if such exist?
I don't want to misspeak, so I can follow up with specific details, but I want to say that categorically speaking, only M1 districts are the areas where there is a large retail special permit required. Now, in C district, in commercial districts that allows both residential and commercial uses, you typically don't have that limitation on retail size. So SOHO, NOHO, in recognition of the mixed-use character, we're keeping the M1 zoning designation paired with residential use. So it's an MX district, but at the same time, it is a major commercial area where I think the retail landscape is more akin to commercial districts where you also have residential use. And that's where we draw the lifting of the retail cap from.
And I would like to just follow up on that. In mixed-use districts where commercial over 10,000 square feet is allowed, I wonder if you can point to any detailed specifications that protect quality of life issues if you're going to be doing research.
Yeah, so I think we can get back to you on that. I do think that, and that's something that we've mentioned earlier, zoning is not necessarily the tool that we use to regulate quality of life issues.
However it's done.
And so here, as part of the neighborhood plan, we will continue to work with agencies to address quality of life concerns that have been raised by the community for a long time, and we've heard loud and clear through means outside of zoning, but part of the neighborhood plan.
Just asking you to check into precedents.
Well, if there is light and air, or lack thereof, that's really the issue too.
Well, no, I'm talking more about signage, illumination, trash.
Yeah.
The same quality of life things.
Right.
Loading.
Yeah, so for example, loading, I think there are ways to address area-wide loading programs as part of under DOT's jurisdiction. They have a neighborhood loading zone that's implemented in some other areas. So we'll continue to work with DOT to see what the opportunities are here in SOHO, NOHO.
What about requiring loading docks?
So there is loading requirement in zoning, and typically, that's required when you build new buildings and there is conversion of uses in existing buildings. I want the board to consider this. Currently loading is required, and in the future loading will be required as well. But to require loading, and there is a existing waiver in the zoning, and that applies to everywhere, not just SOHO, NOHO. When you're a historic district, loading requirements can be waived, right, through zoning. And I would just say that, you know, if folks think that it's appropriate to require external interior loading in terms of change of use in existing historic buildings.
There is a building, the office building, 611 Broadway, that has a very high functioning 18-wheeler loading dock inside the building envelope, on Mercer Street, no less.
Right, so I think if folks think that that's a good way to address this issue, and then we should require new interior loading docks in all historic buildings within historic district, then I think that could be, you know, your recommendation. I do want to say that that's a site-by-site kind of treatment that may not actually serve the district as a whole. So I do think that as part of the neighborhood plan, working with DOT, we have a better solution.
Or perhaps more storage inside the buildings, all those things that we've discussed many, many times would be useful. Does anyone from the committee have an additional question? Carter?
I'm just wondering why DCP didn't respond to Community Board 2's letter dated April 30th. 69 days ago.
What is that? What for the
It's
rest of
a
us?
letter we're inquiring for you. It was copied to.
I have it on my hard drive, if you give me a moment. Oh, there we go. Thank you. Even better.
Do you know which letter that is? Sylvia, do you want to?
I can't put it on the thing because it's on my hard drive. Sorry.
This is for the
letter was dated April 30th, addressed to Director Lago, and it thanked them for her response on.
Oh, this is the Carter revision. Right, the month?
Yes.
Needing an extra month.
Yes.
Let's cut to the chase,
Yeah,
right?
this is basically that, you know.
We're a month short.
Yeah, we're a month short. Andy has a handy binder with all the different things. I only brought some of them with me tonight. Isn't that, I like that binder. But there's a lot of material to review in a very short period of time.
And the city said the material was available, but we said in there that we didn't see it, and you never responded to us to tell us where it was.
And Lizette said from the Borough President's office that we
So they had
should
sent a follow-up inquiry to you guys as well, and you still haven't.
Yeah, we remember. Thanks for the question. I think this regards the new pre-certification notice provision of the charter 197CC that emerged out of the 2019 Charter Review Commission. We responded to the initial letter where we said that, you know, we believe that we had met the requirements of the pre-certification notice in the charter. We can back up a little bit and discuss how we complied with that, which is, you know, over the last 2 years or so, city planning has, you know, we spent a lot of time and a lot of effort working with CBs and borough presidents to really centralize and streamline communications around projects. And that's why we devised the particular system that we did, the zoning application portal and the land use portal, that make sure that all communications around projects are channeled through these dedicated project pages on ZAP and the land use portal. So when this pre-certification notice provision came along, and I mean, and we love this new, we're extremely proud of it, because, you know, just a year or two ago, if a member of the community wanted to see the draft land use application for, you know, a 74-711 in SOHO, or maybe even the SOHO NOHO neighborhood plan, they would have had to go to the CB office to, like, look at a hard copy. And now with ZAP, all that stuff, every single publicly available document is right there on the SOHO NOHO project page. The draft scope of work, the draft EIS, the land use application, everything else is right there for any member of the CB or any member of the public to access.
So when this pre-certification notice provision comes along, of course we're going to use that system, that project management software that we developed, in order to make sure to reinforce the idea that all of our communications, they're not happening through discrete emails in people's private email inboxes anymore. They're not happening through snail mail. They don't involve hard copies at a CB office where nobody knows where it is anyway. It's all through that land use portal.
But only when it gets certified.
Right. But the pre-certification notice, I worked on this with the Charter Review Commission as well, and you go back and you look at the charter commissioners discussing this at the time. They said, well, city projects, they have years of planning in advance. Projects with EISs, they have processes that start 6 months before certification. Those are the gold standard. There's so much information in these projects that are available way before certification. We want a little bit of that for every project. And what we heard from community boards around the city then is that sometimes, I don't think this happened with CB2 because you guys are really on top of this stuff and applicants know that they have to go to you before certification, but some community boards were getting totally surprised by applications on the day of certification. And you guys know better than anybody that if you have to schedule a hearing in the next 60 days and give a project due consideration, you want a little bit more advance notice than having it sprung on you on the day of certification. So that's what the provision was about. We can't require, just one more second. We can't require, every single project that doesn't have an EIS or that's not a city project to provide all this information 6 months in advance, but we want to make sure that community boards are never surprised by applications on the day of certification. And so, I know that CB2...
So your understanding of the intent of the charter revision is you just get an email that says SOHO, NOHO is, a rezoning is going to come in 30 days, so you're not going to be surprised, but there's actually no new information to analyze during that 30-day period.
Well, again, you have to provide location, you have to provide list of actions, you have to provide purpose, and like I said, we wanted to piggyback on that project management software that we created with CBs and BPs, and so that's where all the information lives, of course. I know there was some disappointment that there wasn't a bunch of additional information as part of that pre-cert notice. But
there was none.
The reason is because it was already there, and it had been there for 6 months. There was you had maps, you had proposed zoning districts, and all that stuff well in advance. And so the reason why there was no additional information is because we already had released it previously. And
well, let me jump in with some additional questions on this additional information since we're digging through on this. Some of this is in here, some of it is not. I'll go to the schools information. In the Chapter 4 community facilities, this report, I'm not sure when the date of the DEIS was, but it's using stale data. MS 297 is a new middle school that had a 3-year startup. It's now full. This used 2018, 2019 data. School data has been publicly available for the 2019-20 year. Well, and that's pre-COVID because the rosters are finalized October 31st, 2019. I pulled up a copy on my hard drive. I've been using that for analysis for the last year and a half, or a little bit more than about last year. That was the date on the spreadsheet that I downloaded from the DOE website was July 23rd, 2020. So can you update this community facilities stuff with more recent data? This is actually not counting the COVID year, but that data was available since last summer, and that's deficient. And of course, I have to go through the footnotes to read that, and that's the kind of one example of why you need extra 30 days for this kind of information. I just want to also, in terms of make sure I'm not missing anything. What are the key assumptions for the no action and reasonable worst case development scenario for office space? Maybe I missed those because it's 800 pages to review, but I'm going to go through the slides. So the city compares what would happen if nothing changed to what might happen with the proposed rezoning. And in this scenario, there would be a lot more office workers, but because of the rezoning, the net change in office workers would be 0, and therefore all the analysis associated with the increased daytime population is not part of the EIS analysis. So can you follow up with us on the assumptions for the no action and reasonable worst case development scenario?
Yeah, the no action assumption for the rezoning area is that things will remain unchanged. So
I'm understanding with the concept of it. I'm actually the underlying assumptions for how you get to the data. Let me pull this up. So here's the slide from the DEIS. It's in the DEIS several places. So it shows if there's no action, there's going to be 207,000 gross square feet of office space, and as a result, there's going to be 1,200 new workers. But with action, there's a lot less office space, and so guess what? So the net change between these two scenarios is 0. And we've heard from everyone that they're concerned that there's going to be a lot more office workers with this scenario. So I'd like to understand. I see the number of employees, but how did you come up with these numbers? And it's nifty how they break down to 0 incremental change. So if I don't know if there's more than these footnotes, then please share it. If there's only these footnotes, then I guess I'll just reread it. Yes.
Yeah, I'm happy. Okay, sorry. Then I'll just say that, Janine, I'm happy to follow up with the board to provide a better way to understand this chart. It has a lot of information there. Yes.
So did you not get the letter? I didn't hear anybody say that you guys got the letter.
We got the letter.
Okay, and why did you not respond?
I believe it's because we think that our prior response is sufficient, and I think if we were to respond, it will be kind of a similar response.
And just to be clear, so your statement, John, was that you guys uploaded NOHO information for at least 6 months prior to certification?
No, I mean, that was when the draft scope of work was released, but we certainly updated the page prior to the pre-certification notice being sent out. Yeah.
With what information?
So before the pre-certification notice, we would do this, typically for any projects, including SOHO, NOHO data cleanup on the ZAP portal. So we've uploaded the BBL information, which is the project area, geographies, so that it shows up correctly on the maps.
It's actually still incorrect.
That's because of the way that BBLs show up on ZAP in general. It's a part of the coding issue. That's why we uploaded an additional map and a list of block and lot information as part of the published document on the ZAP portal to make sure that it's clear the geography, what the geography of the rezoning is. We've also updated the ZAP portal to include the information that was published as part of the draft scope of work. So that includes the maps and all the relevant documents. That was before pre-certification notice.
More than 6 months or less than 6 months before?
Certification notice, 30 days before.
Yeah, certification notice is 30 days, and all that required information and orders of magnitude more were publicly available well in advance of the pre-cert deadline. And we agree with the Charter Review Commission that city projects are the gold standard for the amount of outreach and the amount of information that's out there well in advance of certification. And so the fact that the information was out there so far in advance of certification, we see that as like a good thing rather than like a bad thing.
I mean, I just went to the Charter Revision Commission and watched the video that we excerpted in our letter to you guys.
Yeah, I mean,
Benjamin,
I understand that CB2, in the letter expressed a desire to see the entire application in advance of certification, but that would be a different law, a different requirement that the Charter Review Commission. When you are looking at the requirements implemented by a law, you look to the text of the law generally and any other explanatory documents that are released around its enactment, and there's no indication or evidence there that a full application would have been required in advance.
So she was wrong?
She may have misspoken, I don't know. You would have to ask her.
We are not shy to engage and to interact and certainly and to have continued conversations really over the course of more than many months, years at this point. So if we were remiss in not responding to the letter of April 38th because we were counting on previous communications with you that answered the questions, apologize for that. And if it's important for the record, we're happy to follow up with you regarding that letter.
Thank you. You are asking us to give you input. We have. We see very little of that reflected in the information that's come back to us. And so the engagement is very important.
Absolutely.
And not even saying that even one sentence, we believe we answered you already. That's what the community is looking for. And, you know, it's, you've taken into account some of the bids, but, you know, a significant number of the participants in the Envision SOHO NOHO process don't support what you've done. I mean, that's a pretty big issue. You know, most of the people who ran for office in this city council district didn't support what you put out. I mean, and you're saying that this is still an engagement. Where is that engagement going to happen? This is, you know, this is it for us. And so that's why we want to hear from you. And when we even just don't get a response, even just to a letter, and in many people, it's hard to believe that what you put out is the draft, that there were no changes of significance. You know, there were some changes, okay, but people are shocked, given all the time and energy that they spent coming to testify before you. And that's where this comes from. I mean, it's...
Well, Carter, with all due respect, this is a very active engagement we're in with you right now. It's 9:35 on a Wednesday. We're on Baxter Street. And again, you know, this has been many, many months, many, many years, many, many meetings. We believe a very robust engagement process. We believe we have listened very intently. We have taken your input, your opinions of not just those of you who are present today and in recent public hearings, but a very wide spectrum of stakeholders, SOHO, NOHO, and beyond, and beyond. This is a public input process, a public engagement process. We are still in it. We are very, very much committed to it, and we look forward to continuing it with you, with everyone here.
But this is it.
So this is not it. Well, this isn't maybe for tonight, but as you know, the process continues to the borough president, and then it comes to the city planning commission. Of course, we will hold a public hearing. Of course, we expect very, very robust public input and engagement, and we keep going. This process is not over now. Hardly.
Okay. Yeah.
Perhaps.
Okay. I'm gonna.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Edith. Thank you, Carter. One last question. I do want to talk. There are 4 major areas of mitigation, and I just want to talk about open space. The EIS specifically says on page 21-3 that there would be significant adverse impacts to 4 open space resources, and mitigation would be the creation of additional passive open space. And I guess my question is, why passive versus active open space? And related to that, because I see Andy's looking something up, it's page 21-3, middle of this page, it's my understanding that the seeker technical manual says that the ratio should be 80% active, 20% passive. So this seems the opposite, and so I want to understand why passive, and if not, let's talk active.
Oh, sorry. There you go.
Sorry, I think we may have to get back to you on that. I don't want to misspeak. I'm just looking at that page right now, so I'll take a closer look.
And then if you could get back to us in Hudson Square, there was a $5 per square foot essentially tax on new development for an active open space fund. And perhaps that's something you might want to look at, because I think it's interesting that the mechanism is, I mean, I know there's several objectives. One is celebration, but the mechanism is isn't really addressing something that's an adverse, that's in the mitigation chapter. So I guess I would want to focus mechanisms on things that address, that are tied to mitigation.
Yeah, so we'll follow up on the specifics of the open space analysis. I want to just broadly speaking, mitigation measures on these categories are being actively explored between the release of the draft EIS and the final EIS with the approval. So we are talking to parks as well as DOT to figure out ways in which we can mitigate some of these impacts. So this is an interesting idea. We'll look into it. I do want to suggest this community board has a wealth of knowledge in your participation in the Hudson Square rezoning, and I'm sure you've put forward a lot of good suggestions for mitigation because you know the needs of the community best. So encourage you to add any of those suggestions in your resolution.
Who are you working with at Parks?
I'm not sure the name of the planners, but we typically have a working relationship between our environmental review folks and the Parks environmental review folks. And we're bringing the borough office and capital projects